All right, here we go. Today is Sunday, November 5th, 2017, and this is episode 204 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hello, Jerry.
Hello.
Welcome back from your world travels.
Oh, thank you very much. It's good to be back.
Just when we thought you were done.
Yes. The craziness calls, and I must spend another 30 hours on planes next week. So
boy,
here we go.
And can I just say, for the record, I really want to tell Apple, yes, I know my iCloud storage is full. You've told me this every day for the past 6 months. Take the hint.
Oh boy. Maybe Tim Cook listens.
They're very aggressive about reminding you. They really, 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 really want you to know.
Oh yeah,
In multiple ways. I get emails. I get alerts on my phone.
Pop-ups, pop-unders, skywriting. Absolutely.
Pop next twos.
All right. So just a reminder before we get into the show that the thoughts and opinions we express here are ours and do not represent those of our employers. So one of the fun things you and I did, I guess it was last week now, was attend the O'Reilly Security Conference in New York.
Indeed, we did, and I think we might talk about that a little bit on the show.
Absolutely, that was some good fun.
Indeed, it was, and thank you, by the way, to everybody who came out to see us, those who came to the Ignite track and presented and did our karaoke, and of course to O'Reilly for inviting us.
Yeah, it was a good time. So so what did you walk away from the show with?
Boy, that is a big question. As with every conference, it's interesting because a presenter's got to sort of make some assumptions about the level of expertise and knowledge around their audience. And it's an interesting conflict of, if it's an area I have a lot of interest in, I've probably already done a lot of reading and study and research in. So if I go to talks that I have interest in, typically I come away with either confirmation bias of stuff I've already known and seen, or perhaps I pick up one or two interesting tips or ways to communicate, but it's not like mind-blowing. Whereas if I go to something that I don't necessarily have a big interest in or I didn't think about, I learn more. And this was kind of an interesting, kind of example of that, where I went to some non-typical talks for me, and I picked up some good different ways of looking at things. But there were a lot of, I felt, sort of higher end presentations from more mature organizations, at least the one I went to, and they were good, but at the same time, I sort of came away thinking, those are good problems to have with the amount of staff and people and, ability to execute at that level, where they just had enough staff and free time to develop like internal open source software to solve problems. Like, that's awesome. And I'm glad you're sharing it with the community. Man, I wish I could get there. But I will say it's a great conference. I have heard a rumor that it will not be over Halloween next year, which would be nice.
Oh, thank goodness.
I don't know that for certain because I would like to go, but I will tell you, missing 3 Halloweens in a row could be a marriage impacting decision. Mm. Well, maybe not that.
That doesn't sound good.
Anyway, but it's a great time. What were your impressions and thoughts?
So one thing before it slips my mind, and that's easy to do now that I'm old. You had mentioned something that might be an interesting strategy for attending conferences, and that is, maybe look through the roster of talks and intentionally attend ones that don't seem aligned with things that you're interested in. because I think you bring up an interesting point that I hadn't really thought of before, and that is if like when I look at the schedule of talks, I tend to look for things that interest me or problems that I'm trying to solve, and in many cases at least, because of the what you mentioned, that they only have an hour at most to get into the problem, and they have to account for a very diverse range of awareness on the topic. They typically can't dive in at a really deep level. That kind of leads to, at least in my experience, kind of disappointment when you go to conferences or to talks like that. So I'm wondering if the best strategy is to go to talks that maybe don't look interesting to you. I don't know. It's a thought. It's an interesting thought.
I know some conferences do this, but I'm starting to wonder if, as you get deeper into the industry, if it would be useful to have expertise levels in talks. Right. This is a 101 talk. This is a 201 talk. This is a 301 talk.
Right.
I don't know how well that would work because, again, I'm only coming at it from my personal view of my knowledge level and experience level of my own little niches. And there's people far smarter than me who've been running cons for a long time who have probably thought about all this and figured out why I'm wrong. And I'm just, thinking about it for the first time and have no idea what I'm talking about.
You're just cranky.
Well, no more so than usual.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But it was a great conference, and I enjoyed it. And it's still a relatively new conference.
Yeah,
this is only second year.
Second year, right? Yeah.
And I like it. Yeah. I support it. It's very Blue Team centric.
So I wrote up a couple of things on my little blog thing, and I think the one interesting theme I saw, at least in the keynotes, and this is something that I've been kind of thinking about since the conference, and that is, one of the big themes was reducing the friction of security in your organization, and so you made mention of an organization that wrote some open source tools, and I think in one of the keynotes, one of the presenters talked about how they had refined their multi-factor authentication to the point where it was actually faster to use their multi-factor login thing than it was to not use it, like to use a traditional password or whatnot. And they got to that point because they had the capability of making some pretty significant operating system level changes, and I think they had the ability to do that because they had a huge environment. They were a big tech company, and that's obviously not something that a lot of organizations can do. But the point was looking for opportunities to make doing things the secure way more convenient than not. Making it easier to do things the way that you as the security team want people to behave, than not, than doing it the way they would otherwise do it. That's more risky. So I thought that was an interesting concept. It's intuitive, right? It doesn't seem earth shattering, but it's in this age of agile and design thinking and whatnot, it was something I walked away thinking about. The other thing that I and this is something that bothers me with conferences, is I always feel like I walk away with more problems than when I went in.
Yeah.
So I guess there's that. That's probably just the way it goes. But I think overall it was a good conference. I got to meet some excellent people. I got to see my hero Alan Liska again. He's just awesome. He rocked that Ignite talk, that back-to-back talks too.
Mm-hmm.
The only one that brought music and Lego minifigs.
Yeah, and props and music
and cookies.
It's true.
So shout out to Alan. All right. So getting into our stories for today. The first one comes from CSO, and speaking of availability bias, I like this particular story because it well aligns with my view of security training. And the title is 6 Reasons Why Awareness Programs Fail Even When Following Best Practices.
Is somewhere on this list when they're run by Jerry Bell?
No, that would be 7, number 7. I assume if there were 7, that would be number 7.
If the cutoff hadn't been at 6.
Correct. That would have been number 7.
So this is an interesting one because we are often told over and over and over again that a key component of security programs is awareness training and training your employees and this sort of thing. Yet, we still seem to have the exact same problems that we had 20 years ago, even though we have widespread, well-documented, mature awareness programs throughout the industry.
Yep.
So, what are the 6 reasons they fail?
Well, and so I will say before I get into them, one of the reasons I really liked this article is that they raise this author raises things that I really hadn't seen talked about publicly like this before, and so I thought that was it's maybe a good launching off point. So anyway, the first one is massive competition from other communication programs. So the point here is that in a average company, you've got all sorts of stuff going on. There's charity drives and there's there's all sorts of different stuff, and this kind of gets lost in the noise. And
I personally have, I think at last count, 23 different required training programs I have to do throughout the year.
Yeah, and that dovetails into number 2, which is learning fatigue. Yeah. Right, and then they point out that you have your training about your company values and your diversity training and harassment training, and not as if I needed to learn how to do that. And
no, you're pretty good at it, actually.
I know. We'll see that exactly.
In fact, when you said you usually come out of conferences with more problems than when you go in, I almost made the joke that that's because you keep harassing people at conferences. But that is probably not good timing with everything that's going on with Hollywood right now.
Well, that's fair point.
So dovetailing on learning fatigue and your well-heeled 100% score on all of your harassment training.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And so I think the point here is, after you've taken the 17th mandatory company learning online learning education about various topics, how likely are you to be fully engaged?
It's no secret I worked for a bank. So I have to go through many, 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 many different training programs. Most of them are delivered online in this computer-based training. A lot of them are about money laundering and fraud, and how there's certain countries that I can't, or the bank can't transact any business with. Mind you, I'm nowhere near any of those roles that have anything to do with any of that. But they're all presented with the same level of intensity, requirement, importance as any sort of security training. So, again, when everything is a top priority, how do you prioritize?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not that these things are in competition, but I completely agree that it's just one more course you got to get through. Just breeze through it and take the test so you can get back on to what your boss wants you to do.
Yeah, exactly. So number 3 is general disinterest of the target audience in the topic. And, again, most of the, I dare say almost everybody, inclusive of IT and security, are not interested in this training, right? Because the rank and file employee isn't interested because, again, it's just another pointless piece of education from their perspective, and the IT people are offended that they're being made to take this training, which is, intuitive to them, and just, they find it reprehensible that they're being made. So I suspect really nobody likes this, and by the way, I think I talked about this maybe a year or two back, but Delta Airlines, and I like this analogy. When you fly, you're supposed to watch the little training video, and I fly quite a lot, and for a period of time, Delta had their safety training videos were actually fairly subtly comical, right? And they were different. There were different versions, that then had slightly different
kept
subtleties.
it novel.
And I can remember, like, when I would get on the plane, I would actually intentionally stop what I was doing so I could watch it to see, which one of the videos was I going to get, or was it something new? Because they were dare I say it, enjoyable. So there, I said it.
Your entertainment standards have really gone downhill.
I agree. Absolutely.
What's interesting about this one too, and they talk about it in here, is we often hear this mantra that security is everyone's responsibility. I think that phrase backfires. And I think it offends people that, no, we hire a security team. It's their responsibility. My responsibility is insert job title here.
Right. Where are my performance objectives?
Right.
Does this appear?
And I think that it's a well-intentioned phrase. I don't know that it works, honestly. But it's become dogmatic mantra in corporate communication policy.
Yeah, but I think for good reason, because if it were a different way, if you were to say it a different way, it would basically be, well, it's security is the responsibility of the security team, and so
yeah. And here's where I'm going with this. It's a topic I'm noodling because it's a talk I'm putting together for Tactical Edge, is that when someone becomes a victim of some sort of social engineering, and this actually goes into a story we're going to talk about, if they have been told that it's their responsibility, then they feel that they have made a mistake, and they may not react the way that we want them to react when they've been a victim of a social engineering attack of some variety.
That's an interesting perspective.
If they're told that security is your responsibility, therefore it comes with these expectations and perhaps punishments if you fail to live up to these expectations. We're going to talk about this when we talk about a story later about ransomware. How do you get people to then come forward when something happens?
Yeah, fair enough.
So maybe we need a more nuanced message. Defending the company is everybody's responsibility.
Right.
Protecting the company is everybody's responsibility. That feels more like a team-oriented group approach that I think may resonate better.
Yeah, it's only a slightly different message.
Unless, of course, somebody's shoplifting, in which case you get fired if you try to stop the shoplifter. But that's a different story.
Well, at that point, it becomes what's protecting the company, right?
Right. Yeah, what risk are you protecting the company from? Is it a lawsuit or
right?
Brain
damage
amount of
or
shrinkage?
Yeah, brain damage or that package of Twinkies.
Twinkies, but I digress.
So next one, digital learning platforms are only partially effective.
Unless you're selling a digital learning platform, and then by God, are they the best thing since sliced bread?
Well, so here's the problem I have with this one, and I don't disagree with the premise. I do think that by and large they are pretty ineffective because it's really easy to multitask while you're taking these. But the alternative is to cram a bunch of people into a conference room and have someone who's a terrible communicator, you know, chastising people about what a phishing email looks like. Hover your mouse over the link, and I'm not sure that works well either. So,
Yeah.
Anyway. Then that kind of moves into dovetails into the next one, which is security resources are not necessarily good communicators, and that's, I think, from both from the perspective of creating the message and then also delivering the message.
I talk good one day.
Right, but again, that I think this is probably one of the more important aspects here, right? Is creating the message and then delivering the message. Kind of goes back to the point of if you make it engaging, people will want to watch it. Otherwise, it's just like, I mean, there are people I know who when they get those mandatory training classes, which make you watch the video. You hit play and you turn your volume down. Right, and you put that window in the background, and then you go back to work, and then every so often you go back to look to see if there's some kind of prompt. At least that's what I've been told happens.
And by people, you mean you?
I would never do that. I'm just saying, people have told me this is what happens. I take this stuff very seriously.
So you heard about this from Bob then?
Yes.
Yeah. Who? We haven't talked much about Bob lately.
No. Well, I mean, the Russia stuff is very touchy right now, and he is very concerned that Mr. Mueller may be, after him. So
Bob's got to travel in better circles. That's all I'm saying.
He's trying to keep his head down right now.
So back to number 5. The only thing I'd say on this is that security resource not necessarily good communicator. Sure, agreed. Known problem. But aren't most of these packaged commercial off-the-shelf training programs anyway that come from professional organizations that develop these?
So they do mention that. They said that there's a trade-off, because on the one hand you can buy, there's all sorts of different companies that sell the canned packages, but if you do that, they're not usually well aligned and kind of tailored to the way you do business. And by the way, I've seen this in Bob was telling me about this one where his one of his previous employers had hired or contracted out their security training, and the in the security training module it talks about reporting incidents, and it gave some instructions on how to report incidents, which actually didn't work in the company. So if that company's employees followed the protocol specified for reporting incidents in the training, it wouldn't actually work. Like they would get turned away.
That's helpful.
So, so that's the trade-off, right? On the one hand, if you want to build something that is tailored and relevant for your particular organization, you run the risk of doing a crappy job of building the message and delivering it. And on the other hand, if you use something that's stock, it may be well polished but not particularly relevant to your specific organization. So you gotta figure out what's right for you.
Fair.
And then last is, we rely too much on people to be able to do the right thing, and we talk about this one endlessly, right? This I think is, the author here says it very well. Even if we can change the behavior of most, we must consider that computer security is often only as strong as the weakest link, and that's I think that's really important. And so it goes back to the thing that I've said a lot, that security awareness is absolutely important, and the author here reiterates that too. But we have to be cognizant of the limitations it brings. It's a minimization activity. It's not a control.
So it defers a certain level of risk, or it may decrease a certain amount of risky behavior to a certain level, perhaps.
Yes, exactly. It's putting the sign outside your front door saying that this house is protected by such and such alarm company, and instead of locking the door, right? It's not a actual hard control. Not that locks are hard controls either, but you get the point. So
yeah, fair. So what would be better?
I think what would be better is looking at the different risk vectors and trying to put in place actual technical controls. So if you think about the kinds of things that you typically are training people about, it's intended to avoid phishing, which leads to, in most cases, either information disclosure or credential theft, right? Well, the credential theft you can mitigate using multi-factor authentication, and data loss is a little more difficult, but there's solutions out there. And then there's also malware, right? And so things like whitelisting and that sort of stuff. So I think it really comes down to trying to ferret out all the different categories of risk that you're trying to protect against with this training, and then looking at, okay, what can we do in each one of those sections? And by the way, I am cognizant that not everybody can implement multi-factor authentication or whitelisting or whatever. But if that's the case, then maybe you should tailor or really major on the area that you're weak in your training. So,
yeah, I think that's reasonable. I guess the way I look at it is very similar in that assume that your training is only going to stop half of the incidents, and make sure that you've got something else backing you up for those other incidents that people are still going to fall for, whatever issue you're trying to get them to not fall for.
Absolutely. All right, so moving on to our next story, which comes from Motherboard. And the title here is Equifax Was Warned.
This is crazy.
Well, it is crazy, but it's crazy in strange directions. So apparently last year in 2016, a researcher was poking around, and I would dare say poking around to unethical extents on some Equifax websites, and he or she found a vulnerability in a particular site, which, by the way, was not the same site that the big hoopla happened earlier this year on. But the allegation is that this researcher found a bug which allowed him or her to download, as is stated in the article, hundreds of thousands of records of information that was similar to what was allegedly stolen in the Struts. I'll just call it the Struts attack earlier this year. And so this person says they also actually found that they were able to get shell on a number of servers. Again, apparently different servers than were involved in the most recent issue, and reported that to Equifax. And Equifax, I guess it was 6 or 8 months later. It wasn't until June of 2017 that they apparently took the servers offline that were involved in this. And from a timing perspective, that's kind of interesting, because we now know that there was there's probably a lot of stuff going on with respect to the other incident, not the. I guess there were 3 incidents, right? There was the big one that that lost 145 million records. There was one earlier in the year, which has been a lot of discussion about that. But that was the one where Equifax and Mandiant had a dispute.
Right.
And the timeline of this particular site being shut down seems to fit into that first 2017 breach response. And then there was this, this researcher found stuff going on last year. And so the researcher says, or alleges, right, that it was so easy to find that he or she can't fathom that this is, that this wasn't being, constantly accessed. And I think they said, it seems like this was probably, there were probably dozens of breaches, not just one. So,
well, okay, a couple things. And this is purely just me putting my tinfoil hat on for a moment. I have heard some skepticism of these claims on some of the Twitters that we don't really have any proof and we can't really replicate it. So don't know, just throwing that out there.
And you mean that they weren't able to replicate the allegations of this person? Right.
That this researcher came forward, a year after the events, didn't have data to show, didn't have screenshots to show, as far as I know, and could just be making up stories. Because what he's saying is that their entire database of information was just basically nearly publicly exposed for anyone to download and play with by simply altering the URL in the browser to go to an unpublished directory structure. Yeah. And that's some serious level of incompetence. Now, I'm not saying they're not capable of doing this. Clearly, they've had other massive issues. I'm just pointing out for the record, we don't have a lot of supporting evidence to independently verify that this happened.
Yeah, that's kind of my takeaway as well. That the company denies that this happened, or I should say, deny that they ignored a report like this. They say that they don't comment on anything specific, any specific security issues like this, but I think somewhere in here they say they've they did not ignore something like this. So, and that's in my view, at least, that's them denying that what's contained in this report.
It very well could have happened. I don't know.
Yeah,
I really don't know. But okay, let's assume for a moment.
It feels like piling on, I guess.
Well, and I've got no dog in this hunt to defend Equifax, that's for sure. But I just have seen some people I respect throwing a little bit of shade on the veracity of this story. That's all I'm saying. And it's tough to prove one way or the other. If it is true, it's damning. It shows yet again, it could have been some shadow IT. It could have been parts of the organization mishandling data for some skunkworks project, all sorts of stuff. And this is something that is tough, I think, for a lot of security groups to get their arms around if the culture of the organization is such that it allows really sensitive, might as well assume it's, for sake of this information, really confidential data to be manipulated and played with by folks without much control around it. How's the security team going to do much about that? That's not the security team's fault at that point. That's a cultural problem. That's a procedural problem in business activity.
Yeah, definitely. So, something you said earlier, and I've been a little too busy lately to follow the gossip on this particular story, but the issue that's described here would have been trivial to reproduce.
Well, yes, but by the time this anonymous researcher came forth to talk about it with Motherboard, it had been solved. So, yeah. If I'm giving benefit of the doubt, it's good that this anonymous researcher didn't disclose this, during the time that this was exploitable.
Right. I guess maybe I misunderstood. I thought you were saying that the company wasn't able to reproduce it at the time.
Oh, we have no idea. I have no idea
Okay.
if the company.
That's my
No, it is
misunderstanding.
nobody else independent of this researcher has ever come forward
I
to
get it.
corroborate this story.
I get it.
And the only reason I say this is because the level of what this story is alleging, of what this researcher is saying, is so egregious that I would like to see additional evidence because it's such a huge breach of confidential data handling.
Yeah,
Best
and
practices.
I would say we also haven't seen, if it were as trivial as that and well known, as it was alleged in this article, you would have expected to see more common criminals accessing it and then using it for nefarious purposes. And in the in the main data breach, for instance, so far as I know, we actually haven't seen any wide scale use or exploitation. There's a couple of individual lawsuits I think out there that are alleging harm. But to be candid, by the way, I think those are going to be really hard to prove because unless there's some kind of evidence to show that that particular person's data was specifically taken from this dump, I think that's going to be really, really difficult to pin damages on Equifax. But again, I'm not a lawyer, but I would imagine that if this were, readily available and known, it would have been, there would have been people making full use of it. So, but again, maybe it was obscure and obtuse and
Or the bad guys got it and, it just disappears into their world of identity theft and reselling of information, and we never know.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. But anyway, this story seems like a little bit of a I don't know, a hit job might be a little too strong, but there's I can't find the link right here as I'm working through this, but there's a link in here about some previous research that was done in the September timeframe that found just this expansive list of internet facing systems, and they link to a text document, and it's just a list of like host names, and when you read through it, it's like domain names and DNS records. It's just yes, there's a huge number of things, but it really, in my view, you really can't infer anything from that list. And so it's stated in this article as if that's like a really material fact and evidence of kind of out of control IT. So I didn't see it that way. But yeah. Anyhow, this story I think is going to be really interesting to watch. Given the scale and importance of the data that was stolen, I wonder how much of this will end up being in the public eye. So we may find a lot more details about what was going on inside the company than we do in many other breaches. But we'll see.
In related Equifax news, apparently the board cleared the executives who sold stock after the breach became known.
That's right.
They cleared them of having any knowledge of the breach and that they were not doing any sort of insider trading. Now, that's the internal board. We'll see if the SEC or others choose to investigate and come up with different findings.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I was doing a little bit of homework on, just from a investment perspective, if you had bought Equifax, that right after the disclosure was made, you bought their stock, right now you would be up almost 18% in 2 months.
Well, this is a common trend that we have a friend who likes to tell us over and over again that breaches don't hurt stock prices in the long term.
Yeah, Yeah, it certainly. I think their stock was, pre-breach was about 150. It dropped down to like $92, which was that's a pretty significant fall. From 150 to 92, effectively in a matter of days. But then, pretty quickly it went back up to about 108. Now, clearly, it's not where it was, but structurally. I'm not sure that anything has changed in terms of their ability to make money, right? I mean, they'll probably end up having to pay fines, right? But when you think about what you're buying in stocks, you're not buying kind of current cash flow. You're buying the prospects for future earnings growth and whatnot. So. I don't know. I just don't think from a company perspective, this is these breaches, and it's hard to imagine, by the way, anything more damaging. A breach that's more devastating to a company than what happened to Equifax. I mean, it just doesn't get a lot worse than that. So I think this is a good example that it's these breaches probably are not going to be, or maybe never going to be, existential threats to companies unless somebody like the FTC sues them out of oblivion, or the GDPR finds them out of oblivion. But it is interesting that from an individual executive perspective, we saw kind of a house cleaning in Equifax. So I think the companies will probably continue to do okay post breach, but I think we're starting to see we're starting to see these organizations that are breached take up a pretty strong stance on clearing out the riffraff, so to speak, in the executive ranks.
Which certainly will have a downstream impact, I think, on the behavior of other companies.
Oh, absolutely.
In the short term, it's going to suck for security teams. In the long term, they may get more resources and funding. We'll see.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, by the way, that this is going to drive a lot of difficult questions. Some of this, by the way, came up in the at least one of the talks we saw. Wade Baker gave a talk about communicating the value and position of security to the board of directors, and that you've got to think that post Equifax, there's going to be a lot of hard questions asked of CISOs, like, where are we at? How likely is that to happen to us? And how do you intelligently respond? That's, I think there's going to be a groundswell of consultancies making a whole lot of money helping CISOs answer that.
Yeah, Wade's talk actually was really fascinating. We should have talked about it at the top of the show when we were talking about the conference in general. And they did a bunch of original research on the communication gaps between the security organization head and the board. And it was very interesting and telling. And if you get an opportunity to review that research, definitely do so. We'll see if we can find a link to it and share it in the show notes.
Yeah, I think Wade... I was having some Twitter discussions with Wade, and I think I have the link, so I'll put it in. All right, and then our last story for today comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is 59% of employees hit by ransomware at work paid ransom out of their own pockets. So a company named Intermedia performed a survey of 1,000 office workers. I don't really have any idea how they picked the 1,000. Don't really know if this is a scientific survey or not, so put the caveat on that. But what they found was that of the employees who reported having been the victim of ransomware on their work computer, 59% said that they paid for the ransom out of their own pocket. And by the way, the average payout was $1,400.
That's serious money.
That's
for an individual employee.
Serious
that is
money.
And that's average.
Right. That's serious money. So they said 37% who were hit with ransomware had the ransom paid by their employer, which this is just really mind-boggling. If this is actually valid data that you can extrapolate from, I'm really stunned.
Well, and I think, again, to your point, we don't know the scientific survey. We don't know how valid the data is, but let's assume for a moment it is. This goes to what we were talking about earlier, which is, I believe, that we are training our workforce to feel they have failed when they fall for some sort of social engineering scam, and therefore they must hide it because they will be punished in some way, or it could hurt their career, could hurt their job, or could hurt their standing in the company. As I say in the article, shame and embarrassment is cited as the main reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is absolutely counterproductive to what we're trying to do. And we should not be setting up our employees to feel this way.
Yeah, not only that, by the way, I think this is a big problem. Like if that data were regulated by either the GDPR or HIPAA or some of the other regulations globally, sometimes that's a reportable breach. And so if you've got employees kind of trying to take matters into their own hand and pay the ransom, the company doesn't have the opportunity to do what they're actually obligated by law to do. So, I mean, it's badness on a bunch of levels. And by the way, I have seen, firsthand, senior executives make a call of, to get rid of somebody who fell for a fish. Right? It's not pretty.
Yeah, that's just wrong. This is a psychological attack being run by people who are playing the odds and learning weaknesses that people fall for to achieve their goals. And to have the expectation that our employees will never fall for this, I think is just wrong. And I think that's asking far too much of our employees. In every objective study I've seen thus far, there is no way to get to zero failure rate on social engineering. You have to assume some of your employees are going to fall for it. So to fire them over it, I think is incorrect.
Right. Right. If anything, you want to incentivize them to report it quickly.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that was a point I should have made earlier, but you are absolutely correct. The sooner they report it, the better. Because that same technique might be happening elsewhere in the organization. The security team can look at various indicators of compromise or any sort of various other activity coming off that host. I'm struggling for the word here. Sorry. Some other indicators that host might be compromised in some way, or that there might have been something more than just whatever the initial phishing was. Some downloader that's loaded other stuff. There might be other indicators.
Yeah.
Or there may be command and control domains they need to block at the proxies, or there are things the security team could do. Now, we're preaching to the choir for people who listen to the show. But where I'm going with this is I think this is the shift I would like to see in our communication campaigns of, we will incentivize you for reporting this, not punish you.
Right. Yep. But, you have to walk the line between that and perverse incentives, right? There's the ever-present or ever-popular story about, rattlesnakes in India. I think it was India, right? Where there was a bounty for killing rattlesnakes. So people took to raising rattlesnakes, and then killing them and then turning them in for the bounty. So, you gotta, you don't want to be giving out, iTunes gift cards for so you have to walk the line, right? That's my point.
Yeah, that's a good point. You and all your reading about economics and
I know.
Game theory and psychology.
I know. So, So anyhow, that's it for this week. Anything else that you wanted to bring up?
As always, thank you to our Patreon donors. You guys are awesome. I think, we hear lots of grumbling when we're not publishing a weekly show, and we're sorry. We're trying. Mainly, it's just been life and work getting in the way.
Yep.
But hopefully, we'll get back on a more regular schedule soon. Let's see. We will be next conference we're going to is in Bogota, Colombia, of all places. Tactical Edge Conference. So if you happen to be down there,
tacticaledge.co.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if you go there and it's in a different language, there is a link to get to the English version of the site.
Yeah, in the upper right hand corner. Yeah, it looks like it should be a pretty good conference. Some awesome speakers, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Which does not include us, even though we are speaking.
That's exactly right.
What else? Trying to think. No, I'm good. That's all the fun stuff. What about you?
I will be. I'll be making for those people who are, listening to this quickly and happen to be in the greater Paris area. I will be in
Paris, France.
It's in Paris, France. I'll be in Paris next week with a couple of days to kill. I've never been to France, so looking forward to seeing the Eiffel Tower. I've heard I have to very very surreptitiously take pictures of the Eiffel Tower. So I'll be doing that undercover somehow.
Didn't we just talk about we're trying to avoid so much travel so we can get the show up more regularly?
Yes. Well, unfortunately, this is the way it works. But by the way, I do intend to the next week on Sunday I'll be flying into Paris, so we should be able to record a show. It'll be remote, but we should be able to do one.
Okay, cool. Well,
anyway,
sounds good.
Thanks for listening. Just a reminder, you can find links to the stories we talked about today on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Kalen on Twitter at Lurg, and you can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLincoln. With that, we will talk again, I really hope, next week.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
See ya.